Concern about water contamination spreads to a new block of St. Paul's Hospital. A panel of Japan's lower house okays bills that would give a greater role for the military. And in Athens, the biggest anti-austerity protest in months, following parliamentary approval of harsh bailout programme.
Good evening. The lead-contaminated water concerns has now spread to St. Paul's Hospital, as well as some private housing. This after the plumber responsible for the pipework at several public housing estates, where excessive levels of lead were found, revealed his company also handled such projects. And he said it's likely much of the same materials were used. Tests have shown the welding filler used in connecting water pipes at Kai Ching Estate in the Kai Tak development area was half lead. A key concern surrounds who made the call to purchase and use this material. Speaking on radio this morning, the plumber of the pipework at Kai Ching Estate, Lam Tak Sam, insisted he was just an employee of Horbu Key Construction Engineering Company and that the tools and materials were provided by his firm. My role is to oversee all the certification documents issued by the Water Supplies Department and surveyors, he said. My job is to inform workers at the construction sites that the housing department has to check everything before anything can be installed. He insisted he did not manage purchasing. On whether the final materials used for each job is the same as what the purchasing department ordered, Lam said that's overseen by other co-workers. The plumber complained it's unfair that the government singled him out before any investigation had been carried out and hoped his employer would speak up about the incident. Lam revealed his company has also been contracted to do piping works for St. Paul's Hospital in Causeway Bay and other private housing developments. He said the materials used would probably have been much the same as those used at Kai Ching Estate. St. Paul's Hospital has confirmed it hired Horbu Key to install the pipework in its new Block B. The hospital said the building is not yet in use, so no patients are affected. It took samples of the pipes and the welding material for testing earlier today. Its contractor has agreed to hook up the water supply earlier than scheduled, so all parts of the water supply chain could be tested properly. The hospital added that the pipework of Block A was not installed by Horbu Key. Horbu Key Construction Engineering has refused to respond to our inquiries so far.
Well, Secretary for Transport and Housing, Anthony Chung, said today the main contractors involved in the water contamination saga have promised to shoulder their responsibilities. As Liz Yoon reports, the Housing Authority has promised to review and improve on quality control of its construction materials.
The Housing Authority reviewed today for the first time the results of tests on the welding filler metal taken from water pipes at 2 vacant units at Kai Ching Estate. Both samples contained about 50% lead. Director of Housing Stanley Ying couldn't say if the filler material was provided by the contractor, China State Construction. But as the contract states that materials must not contain lead, Ying said the company, as the main contractor, must still bear the responsibility for this. The Housing Authority will also hold Shui On Building Contractors Limited liable according to its contract for the building works at Kwai Lun Estate, where lead-tainted tap water was also found. The authorities said the two contractors have agreed to take up remedy work and will, for the time being, help provide safe drinking water to affected residents. Secretary for Transport and Housing Anthony Chung promised to conduct a comprehensive review of the Housing Authority soon.
Review committee that is going to be set up under the Housing Authority is to do a thorough, comprehensive body check of our existing system and mechanisms for quality assurance of materials and parts used in public housing projects, including prefabricated components.
Lawmaker and Housing Authority member Alan Leung hopes the review will save the authority's reputation.
The building ordinance does not apply to projects undertaken by the Housing Authority. Now, if the Housing Authority can no longer convince the law enforcement agencies that it can competently and ably look after the whole construction process, then this exemption will at once become questionable.
At a 3-hour meeting today, members of the Housing Authority also expressed concern over the trouble and anguish residents of the affected estates are suffering. They discussed in a meeting suggestions of offering these residents compensation in terms of rent reduction or rebate on water bills, although there's no conclusion on that yet. Liz Yin, TVB News.
Overseas now, a panel of Japan's lower house today approved legislation that could see the country's troops fight abroad for the first time since World War II. The highly contentious bills, which would drop a ban on fighting to defend a friendly country, have sparked huge demonstrations in Tokyo. Alan Buckner reports.
An estimated 100,000 protesters gathered outside the Parliament building last night ahead of today's vote. Opponents say the bills violate Japan's pacifist constitution and could drag the country into U.S.-led conflicts around the globe. Polls show 80% of those surveyed are against the legislation. The unpopular bills were crafted after Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's cabinet adopted a new security policy last year. It reinterpreted part of Japan's post-World War II constitution that permitted the military's use of force only in self-defense. The legislation in question would also allow Japan to defend its allies against aggression, a concept called collective self-defense. Abe called the bills absolutely necessary, saying the security situation surrounding Japan is becoming increasingly challenging. In Beijing, the foreign ministry called into question Japan's post-war commitment to peaceful development and urged Tokyo to learn the lessons of history. Sino-Japanese ties have long been frayed by China's memories of Japanese wartime aggression. Meanwhile, the South Korean Foreign Ministry urged Japan to discuss its new security policy transparently to maintain peace and stability in the region. Dozens of South Koreans demonstrated outside the Japanese embassy in Seoul to voice their opposition. And protesters were out in force in Tokyo again today. The legislation will now go to Japan's lower house. If no vote is taken after 60 days, it will be returned to the full lower house, where Abe's coalition can enact it with a 2/3 majority. Alan Buckner, TVB News.
France's interior minister says security forces have prevented an attack on French military installations. Bernard Sasseneuve says 4 people whose leader had links to jailed jihadists have been arrested. Sources say the attackers were planning to carry out the assault in January next year and were targeting a senior military official. The suspects are between the ages of 16 and 23. One of them served in the French Navy. France remains on high alert after 17 people were killed in attacks in and around Paris early this year. Last month, a suspected Islamist beheaded his boss and tried to blow up a US-owned industrial gas plant in the suburbs of Lyon.
Former US President George H.W. Bush has broken a bone in his neck during a fall at his home. A spokesman says the 91-year-old is in stable condition and doing fine. Bush is being treated in a hospital in Maine, but his stay is not expected to be long. The 41st US president will have to wear a neck brace. Bush was hospitalized in December for about a week for breathing difficulties. He served one term as president, highlighted by the Gulf War in Kuwait. He lost his 1992 re-election bid to Democrat Bill Clinton. And still to come in our news tonight. A new batch of iBond available for subscription later this month. A former ranking official receives a suspended jail sentence for breaching the Trade Descriptions Ordinance. And in Japan, a hotel staffed by robots.
We are going to steal I fly to the moon. I shrink the moon. I grab the moon. I sit on the toilet. What?
You're funny.
It's hard to be
The greatest villain of all time!
when you've got other things on your mind. Saturday, Despicable Me on Pearl's Weekend Blockbuster. Is it too late to stop the infestation of our waterways? Friday, Infestation at 9:30 on Pearl.
每個女人都有飯前願望，就係唔會肥，走啲糖咪得啦。每餐飯前食2粒，願望成真。
Back to true.
The time now is 7:41. The time check was brought to you by Seiko.
And a warm welcome back to TVB News. Greece has said yes to more austerity required to open up negotiations on financial aid. The Greek Parliament has voted to implement more painful reform measures that include pension and public spending cuts, as well as sweeping sales tax hikes. Now, the debt-ridden country is seeking urgent relief from European lenders as Eurozone finance ministers discuss rescue financing. James Aiken reports.
After hours of debate and a late-night session, Greece's parliament voted 229 to 64 to implement more sweeping reform measures in a deal that no one seems to like. The package of measures had to be approved to open talks on a new €85 billion bailout. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras said it came down to a choice between accepting the harsh terms offered by lenders or default. Tsipras required the support of pro-European opposition parties to push the measure through. But the vote triggered a revolt in his own party, with dozens of lawmakers accusing Tsipras of blackmail. Greece's former finance minister, who headed the bailout strategy until he was replaced 10 days ago, also voted against the package, though he denied it afterwards.
I didn't vote against the government.
You did not vote against the
government? Nope. But I'm not going to give you an interview now either.
On the streets of central Athens, thousands marched in protest. By evening, police were responding with tear gas as anti-establishment demonstrators lobbed petrol bombs in front of the parliament in some of the most serious violence in more than 2 years. Strikes are now gripping the country as workers show their anger over the austerity measures. The Greek vote clears the way for other national parliaments to approve the start of bailout talks. It also allows the release of funding to help Greece's banks reopen more than 2 weeks after capital controls were imposed to prevent them from collapsing. Meanwhile, Greece is facing a Monday deadline for another debt payment to the European Central Bank. EU officials are considering loaning Greece €7 billion from a special fund overseen by all 28 EU nations so it can meet its upcoming debts. James Aiken, TVB News.
Back locally, the government today announced it will sell as much as $10 billion of inflation-linked bonds, or I-bonds, starting on Tuesday. The bond will have a 3-year maturity. Hong Kong residents can apply for the 5th I-bond issuance from July 21st to the 29th. The minimum subscription amount is $10,000 per board lot. The I-bond will be issued on August the 7th and listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange on August the 10th.
Former government official Chow Tung-shan was handed a 2-week suspended jail sentence today after being found guilty of accepting payments for services he couldn't provide. Winner Wong has the story.
Retired